Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
Hello and welcome to Emotional Baggage. My name is Henrietta Bowden-Jones and I was born in Italy, the daughter of an Italian mother and an English father. As a child, I only spoke Italian, and it was only in secondary school that I began to learn English before being sent to school in England as a teenager. I'm a medical doctor and have been working in London as a psychiatrist for almost 30 years. I have always been fascinated by the experiences of others who, like me, travelled not only geographically but also emotionally to other parts of the world, often against their wishes, being uprooted from a world they belonged to. My guest today is Syrian musician Maya Youssef, who plays the qanun, a musical instrument traditionally played by men. The civil war in Syria broke out when she was teaching music in Oman, and Maya had to make the difficult decision of whether she should return to a war zone with her one-year-old son or to start a new life. In the end, she decided not to return and found asylum in this country where she has released 2 albums, Syrian Dreams and Finding Home. She once said that the act of playing music is the opposite of death. I asked her what she meant by this.
At the time, it was really harrowing for me to really even understand what was happening. Just all of the sudden, Syria became so vulnerable, and just before that, it was a place that was booming and blossoming, and there was like a sense of goodness and expansion. There was this good sense of, okay, things are getting better. Civil society was moving into improving laws. And then all of a sudden, the war started and I started losing friends. I started wondering if I'll ever see my parents again. I started see places that I loved being destroyed, and I was just dealing with a deep sense of loss and grief, and I was scared of death at that time. I didn't, like, when my grandmother died, which is my grandmother is the person who taught me how to love. I couldn't go to her funeral. I was scared of death, I couldn't face it. But that was the beginning for me to make peace with death through my music, because when you're playing music, you're alive. Every cell of your body is vibrating. At least that's the case for me. I'm describing my unique experience.
Can I pick up for a moment? You said something very special. My grandmother taught me to love.
Yeah.
How did she do that?
Well, she loved everybody. People visited her from, different towns because they heard of this benevolent woman. She was exuding goodness. She just was kind to everybody.
And tell me a little bit more about her then. There must be things that you carry with you that are her. Maybe things she taught you in terms of the way you are or you behave or the way you think. Are there any examples?
She would always start with Sabah al-Khair wal-Rida, which is this is a morning of goodness and contentment. And she will immediately get to work with the house, and the way she fed us the most amazing food and the way she really looked after everybody around her,
So I love that. So starting the day with positivity and gratitude. Positivity and gratitude are the answer to life, really, aren't they?
Totally,
If you can start
completely.
the day like that, you will have a good day, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yes. And we would go to the, we would go to the land around the house, and we will, pick up the vegetables, and we'll see if the hens laid any eggs, and then we'll come back and cook together. She was really a simple woman, but she exuded so much goodness that just made her absolutely magnetizing.
You were actually in Damascus itself. Shall we talk a bit about the environment that you grew up in? I'm really keen to dig deep here and look at, the sort of, what were the streets like? What were the scents like? What were the people like? Take us there.
Yeah. So our flat in Damascus is in, basically it was on the 5th floor in a pre-constructed building. So it's all not very tall buildings, 5th floors. It's at the top of a hill, so you can see the mountain from the back. My house itself was full with books, like a lot of books, mountains of books. And it had also a lot of cassettes, and we're talking like music from everywhere. A lot of vinyl, that I was not allowed to go anywhere near the vinyl because it was too precious. And it was a small, cozy place. Behind the house was my primary school, so my mother would literally be able to see me in the, backyard when during break time.
And tell me a little bit about your parents, because of course to have a house filled with books and music makes me immediately love your parents. They obviously they sound great. So tell us about them.
So my mum, she always translated literature from French to Arabic. I remember her sitting down on the floor surrounded by encircled by dictionaries, basically, because some of the language she translates is old language. So that's what she did. She still does that. My dad was a writer, still a writer, and a journalist. He basically wrote TV series, and they were both very much into music, culture. We had sculptures coming over, artists, people from all walks of life and all fields in the arts, basically. So it was a very rich environment for me to grow up in.
But I want to go back to your mum for a second. Was it the norm to have translators who were women when you were young? Was that completely normal, or were there more divisions of roles at the time in the culture that you grew up in?
I think it's still, she's one of the few. There are not. She was the only woman in her department.
That's what I wondered. I actually would have expected that, to be the case. I was curious to know that. So she was, in a way, she represented something as well, didn't she?
Yeah, completely. And
what was that? What do you feel she gave you that, in terms of being the only woman in that department, etc.?
She's very shy. She's very reluctant to share how amazing she is, but she's always too embarrassed to show who she really is. She, in her secrets of secrets, she's also a poet, and she never showed her poetry. So yeah, my mum showed me that it's possible. You need to do whatever you want to do, and you can go for it. She's the one who took me to most of the music classes. She would read her books outside the class. Yeah, I always say, if I had different parents, I would have had a very, very different life. And my parents instilled in me work ethics, the right mindset. You look at them and you think, wow, they're cool. I better do something with my life that is as cool as them.
Yes, I can really feel that. How your mother wrote her poems in secret, kept them secret, but put her daughter on the stage. Essentially, she allowed you to go out there. She supported you in your performing life and your life of music, which is wonderful, really. There is something there about believing in you. Your journey towards becoming a musician started early at primary school. I'm aware that around the age of 7 you began to study music. Would you like to tell us about that part of your life?
Yes, I mean, I was singing to most of the tunes in the back of the car, when we were traveling or going places, and my dad noticed that. They signed me up to, it was called Al-Mahad Al-Arabi at the time. And so when you were about 8, you were supposed to pick a musical instrument. My parents suggested the violin. I took it on. I wasn't hugely enthusiastic about it. And one day, my mum was taking me to the Music Institute in a taxi. It was like a hot summer's day. And the taxi driver turned on the radio and I heard the Qanun. So it was a moment of falling in love, because at that moment, as if that sound went straight to my heart, and I told him, "What is this instrument? I want to play it." And he said, "This is the Qanun. You are a girl and this instrument is for men." And he laughed at me. And my mum just shrugged her shoulder, and I said, "I will play this instrument, you will see."
Wow,
Obviously,
how powerful to have had that moment, that decisive moment in that car. You talk about the weather, you talk about the fact it was summer. You obviously have, it's one of those moments in life that determines so much more. But
yes.
where did that determination come from? I mean, you were 8 years old, you were speaking to a taxi driver you didn't know, and you said, "You will see, I will play this instrument." Where did that self-confidence come from before we carry on the story about the Qanun?
I've always been strong-willed since I was really little. And again, going back to my parents, if you had other parents in a patriarchal society, you'd be told to be quiet and just never say such things ever again. In Syria and in Arab countries, they would call the man the father of the eldest, so father Abu. Even if your eldest is a daughter, the minute you have a son, even if he's 10 years younger, you're called the father of the boy.
Yes.
Because the boy is considered to be the asset to the family, while the girl is groomed for marriage, in traditional society view. I used to get so furious, I'm the eldest. Why are they calling you Abu Ram?
I'm so pleased you're mentioning this, because really you were swimming against the tide, weren't you?
Yes.
To get exactly where you wanted to get.
Completely. And my dad said, "You're right. Okay, I'm Abu Maya," and people will say, "How are you, Abu Ram?" And in front of me, I will get really upset, and he will see me "No, I'm Abu Maya."
Well, congratulations to you. I think it's it's really credit to the environment and the parents you had that
completely
they allowed you to express your self-confidence and the belief in yourself that your grandmother too gave you to be able to follow what you felt was so important. And you say by the time you're talking about a sound reaching your heart, lighting a fire within you, then it's time to pursue it. Talk to us more about this journey of the Qanun. How did you continue with how did you even begin to play it then?
So that very day that the taxi driver told me, "You're a girl," I was sitting in my solfeggio class, music theory class, and the head of the institute, Ustaz Balir, walks in. He announces that there is a new class, it's a Qanun class, and if anybody wanted to sign up, all they had to do is come after the class and sign up. So naturally, I ran and I signed up, to the astonishment of my mum. But again, going back to how amazing my parents are, in 2 days, that violin was returned, and I had a humongous second-hand Qanun waiting for me on the coffee table after school.
Oh my goodness, that's an incredible vision. Describe the Qanun. Tell us how big it looked and where it sat and your reaction, because you weren't expecting it, presumably.
No, I wasn't expecting it. So our coffee table is in the middle of the living room, and so my dad put it, right on top, and I just walked in and I just couldn't believe my eyes. It was so euphoric.
And tell us, did you get any objections to playing the Qanun from men at any time?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because I came to a personal conclusion, which is this. The Qanun is a very powerful instrument, and the minute that you have a Qanun on your lap, you have the spotlight on you. That is an indication of power. And to those who do not embrace women being in their power, it's threatening. It
Absolutely.
Shouldn't be the way it is, you should be, I mean, it's not very long ago that somebody called me radical,
So what you are saying really is that in a patriarchal society such as Syria, the unconscious rejection of you, a female musician, playing such a instrument representative of Arabic culture was, if not personally clear to these individuals, but certainly distasteful or impossible at a much deeper level that people may not have been able even to be aware of. It was more of a sort of communal thing that was a problem. I wonder whether therefore, when you started teaching the instrument, you might not have had many men wanting to learn from you, or was this not a problem?
I mean, now, when I started teaching the instrument, I think I was in Syria, yeah. I wasn't teaching very actively. And then the second time I was teaching was in Oman and Muscat. I was hired to teach full-time, actually, in a university. So half of my students were male and half of them were female. But now that I have my online academy, most of my students are women. Interestingly.
Isn't that brilliant? There's a sort of addressing of balance. Now, let's move on to Oman, because it was there, when you were teaching there, that the Syrian war started in 2011. Tell us about the events that led to the beginning of your journey, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I was contracted to teach there. It was so beautiful to teach there for 2 years. But then at the time I had my son, and so he was literally a baby. And basically the war broke, and at the time the university decided not to renew my contract, and I was looking at this baby thinking, there's no way I'm gonna take you to a war zone, period. So I started looking and found this completely new scheme called the Tier 1 Exceptional Talent Visa, and I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. I applied and I got it. And yeah, that's how I ended up coming here in January 2012, basically.
You talked about your son, and it feels like an intensely emotional, protective decision you took in relation to not having your son grow up in a war zone. How did you make that complex decision in relation to the absolute love and attachment that you have for your parents?
It's hard. It's very hard, I just, any mother who's listening will do what is best for her child, but particularly if it's, at the time he was like under a year old, tiny. And obviously you have to make the hard decision of moving away again, even though I knew that I'm gonna miss them terribly, and I knew that I might not see them for a very, very long time. but I just had to do what is right at that time. It's never easy. I mean,
I can really understand that. This is very moving, and obviously everyone listening will be wanting to know from their perspective, understanding how difficult it was for you and doing it for your child. How do they feel about the move? How did they handle it? What did they do to feel close to you? Give us a bit more about this.
You mean my parents? Or?
Yes, your parents. Yeah.
I mean, we WhatsApped regularly, and we spoke all the time, really, whether on chat or voice calls, and thank God for that.
Absolutely, thank God for technology. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the technology, when the war started, particularly in the beginning, you would have days with no electricity back home, no internet, and I would freak out, that, are you okay? Talk to me. Where on earth are you? What are you doing? Yeah, it's incredibly hard because your instinct is would say, let's stay close together so I can look after you. But obviously that wasn't possible. So these early days were very hard. They're very, very hard.
When was the last time you saw them?
Last time I saw them was 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. We had to meet in a country where we can all go because they can't come here. I chose not to go because of my son again. Before that, I haven't seen them for 6 years. So it's an awfully long time, They're getting old. So hopefully this year I will muster my courage and go visit them.
You would have been growing a child up much more isolated than you would have expected if you had looked ahead at your life when you were younger.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up surrounded by my aunts and uncles and my grandmother and my granddads and huge extended family. So this thing where you have to just be completely alone, while trying to adjust to the weather of a new country, to the, trying to get work because, okay, I'm here. But how do I actually start to get gigs? I had no clue. I don't know how I did it, with honesty.
The overwhelming sense of loss and grief from losing one's homeland that comes across from any Syrian that certainly I've come across in London. How does that experience of having a place that you can't return to in the sense that it's no longer the place that exists in your memories and the place that you left behind. Can you share some thoughts about that, whether your personal experiences or some collective experiences?
This is very hard. Because in a way I feel I never had the chance to say goodbye.
Yeah. You didn't have the choice, in a way. You events took over.
Yeah. And, I'm not the only one who says that world, despite it having problems, obviously, it was special, and I will never be able to see it or experience it. I'm really scared of facing and knowing the Syria that I love after the war.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, it's actually on my new album. There's an anthem called Motini, My Homeland, and people usually play it in a really extroverted, like almost martial way usually. But to me, it's always like a eulogy. It's a eulogy to a lost world.
A lost world is such an apt way of putting it, carrying so much beauty, so much emotional enrichment, and that's maybe part of the issue. That it doesn't exist any longer in that sense, but exists within you.
It exists within me. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the people I've spoken to say that they no longer feel intense nostalgia because they've internalized it. It is now in the way that when you lose a loved one, you can keep the best parts inside of you and they live and evolve with you. That is, at some level, what you've done. You've brought Syria to the UK in its most beautiful musical form. Talk to me a bit more about that in relation to your creativity, what you put into the music and how it's received.
I only started writing because of loss and grief. I didn't feel the need to write. Basically, there was a key moment. I was in my living room in London and I was watching the news, and my son was sleeping right next to me, and on the TV screen there was an image of a small girl who looked like my little Adam, but she died and while she was asleep in Damascus. And obviously there was this welling up, of like, that's it, this is the end, my world is collapsing. And I just closed the door so I don't wake him up. I was crying and I held the canoe, and music started to come out while I was weeping. I was in this like twilight zone between two worlds. I was not here. And that's how I started to write. That was Syrian Dreams. That was the title track of my first album. The weird thing is that even though what made me write is that initial moment, it was like I was walking through the fire to this other side of me. Even though that's what unleashed this world to come out through me, I don't see myself as, I'm a co-creator, but I do actively ask Spirit, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, to come through me. And now I see myself as an instrument. At the time, I didn't understand that. But basically, even though what drove the experience was loss and grief, see that it helped me write really joyful music, because I've been into the deepest despair. So in that sense, I can write music that is deeply joyful.
Yes. So what? If I let me see if I understand. So you hit rock bottom emotionally, psychologically. There was a fragmentation of your world and a complete despair that led to then the composing began as a sort of healing process almost.
Yes, completely.
And the healing eventually worked and brought joy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you then share that joy and that process of connecting with the past and the present with others? I know that I might be wrong, but I think you played in a refugee camp at some point.
Yes, I have. And the interesting thing is that when I share it particularly with people from, Syria or from the Arab world, they come to me and they say, this music brought me back to a memory. I wrote those down because I cherished them so much. Somebody said it brought me back to when I was sitting in my yard under my lemon tree and I could smell the lemon tree.
And does that happen to you when you play sometimes? Do you remember a particular room in your childhood home?
Absolutely.
Or some of your relatives you were with doing things together? What sorts of memories do they evoke, these notes?
It can be really anything. It can be like a snapshot of me walking in old Damascus, or, being in the storage room where my granddad stored all the oranges, being surrounded by that smell, or the face of my parents, or the face of my grandmother. It's very interesting. There is nothing. It's not fixed experience. It's very fluid. But sometimes it's a feeling of immense love. So it can be a mixture of feelings, sometimes smells, sometimes visuals. I don't think I've ever had anything in my life that takes me as deep as playing music, because when those images and sounds and smells come back, and I either grin on stage or choke. It's like I'm there, I am there. There's no doubt in mind that I'm not there.
And you yourself cannot predict what is going to come up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's like dreams, You never predict whatever you're going to have.
So listening to you now, another thought is coming to me, that actually you play and play in order to return home every time you do.
Yeah, it is my home. Playing music is my home.
That was musician Maya Youssef, and you've been listening to Emotional Baggage with me, Henrietta Bowden-Jones.
Who do scientists turn to for answers when trying to solve tricky problems?
The digestive chambers of a cow's stomach have helped solve an environmental crisis.
Animals. 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter from the BBC World Service. All episodes of seasons 1 and 2 are available now.
We're about to delve into how one particular type of crustacean has inspired a new way of exploring space.
60 brilliant stories about the ingenious animals inspiring advances in science and technology.
It all comes down to the evolutionary design of their wings and feathers.
Search for 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter wherever you get your podcasts.